guys, welcome to another episode of Comic Tech Tutorials. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to do web development, and the framework that we're going to use is ASP.NET. And what you're going to learn is you're going to learn how to design a simple login form. And as I told you earlier on, ASP.NET is a framework that is being designed by Microsoft. It simply means Active Server Pages.NET. It's a framework which helps us we web developers to design robust interfaces and applications with ease with just click and drag options, and it's very good for upcoming developers. So what we're going to learn today is we are going to learn how to design a simple login interface, and we are going to also learn how to create database using a relational database management system, that's SQL, and we are going to use Microsoft SQL Studio for that. And we are also going to learn how to connect to the database in our ASP.NET project. Without much ado, I've launched my Visual Studio, and I'll go to File, then I'll click on New, then New Project, and I'm assisting you to create a new project in Visual Studio. That's an ASP.NET web application using Visual Studio. The version that I'm using currently is the 2015 version. You can follow along if you are using current versions of the Visual Studio. So the framework I'm using is ASP.NET web application, and I have to specify the name of the application that I'm building, and here I'm gonna maintain the web application. That's the default name that's been given by my Visual Studio, and I have to specify that the language, that's the backend language that I'm using, should be a C#. It should be a C# language. And after making all the necessary selections, you click on OK for Visual Studio to create the project for you. Within a split second, it will ask you whether you want to use templates for that. And since we are learning from scratch, I'm gonna select empty project so that we manually add the features that we need into the project. So within a split second, it will load for you to have access to the interface of your first ASP.NET project. As I said earlier on, ASP simply means Active Server Pages, and .NET in addition to it give us access to variety of the .NET framework. The .NET framework is a collection of wide variety of libraries by Microsoft, and it helps developers to build robust apps within split seconds without any delay. And it's very good if you are a .NET developer. This will become very easy for you. So our application has been created successfully by the Visual Studio. So there's nothing in our application, so we have to add our forms inside the application manually. So to add a web form into the application, all you have to do is to come to the Solution Explorer. It's at the right hand side of your Visual Studio. Then you right click on the Solution Explorer, then you click on Add. After clicking on Add, you wait for a while, then you click on New Item. Within a split second, it's open an interface for you to specify the item that you want to add. And here, since you are building a website, I'm gonna select Web Form. Then I'll come to the name option. Then I'll highlight the Web Form 1. Then I'll change the name to login. Since we are building a simple login interface, I will specify the name as login. Then I'll maintain the extension, that is the ASPX. That's the extension for ASP.NET application. So after doing that, I'll click on Add. Within a split second, our web form will be added to our Solution Explorer, and it will give us the code. So there you go. As I told you earlier on, the ASP is Active Server Pages, and it's good for building robust web forms or web applications. So the syntax is just like HTML, but here it's kind of server side, just like PHP. If you are convenient with PHP, you see that it's a server side language that we are going to use in our web development process. So if you are much more of a coder, you can write all the codes here for your application. And if you are much more liking to use the graphical user interface, you can switch to the design field, which you can also, with the help of the toolbox, you can manually click and drag the forms or the element that you need into your form. I mean, you can do it manually with click, you drag, then you drop into the form to be able to create a beautiful interface. But before we proceed, I want us to go to the code aspect, and I want us to add a simple title. If you have code in HTML before, you know that any HTML website that you see, or any website that you see, it has a title, and it usually appear at the title bar. So I'm going to add a simple title for application, and I'm going to add educational software as the name or the title of our application. So I've added our educational website, since we are building a website. So I've added the site, I've added the title successfully. So now I'll switch back to the design view. Then I will start designing my form. And as I told you earlier on, we are designing a simple login form. So if you want to do it and do it beautifully, I'll advise you to add a table to your form. So I'm gonna add a simple table to the form. And you know, tables have rows and columns, and for the horizontal aspect, it's being termed as the row, and then for the vertical aspect, it's being termed as column. So I will need 4 rows and 2 columns. So afterwards, I'll click OK. Within a split second, you see it has been added successfully to my form. This is 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 rows, then 2 columns. Hope you can see. So I'll start by allowing the user to enter his or her username. So first of all, I'll need a label. What label does is that it helps us to print something on the screen of our web form. So I'll click on the toolbox, then search for label. Then I'll click and drag it into my web form. So you see it has been dragged successfully into my web form. I can expand it using the controls that are being added to the label. And if, for instance, your label doesn't have a control or a handler for you to be able to resize it, I would advise you to follow this tutorial to be able to have access to this particular functionality. So all you have to do is to go to tools, then you click on options, then you scroll down to web forms designer, then you expand it, then you come to CSS styling, that's the cascading style styling. Then you make sure that this auto style application is being selected, and these 3 options is being also selected. These 3 radio buttons, you have to make sure that they are being ticked. That's the checkbox, you have to make sure that they are being ticked. Then you click on OK, and it will apply the styling, or it will give you the functionality to be able to expand or resize the label or the tool. So I will need 2 labels in addition to what I've added. So this is my second label, and this is my third label. So I've added them successfully. And I also need a text box. What text box does is that it allows the user to insert something into our program. So I'll click and drag as I did for the label. So I'm clicking and dragging into the second column. So you see it has been added successfully to the second column. And I also need a button. A button, that's the submit button. It will help me to be able to submit my forms successfully. So you see it has been added to my form successfully. So to be able to move your controls in your web form, I'll advise you to place the cursor at the topmost part where you find the ASP button there. Then it will give you the cross icon for you to be able to freely move it along your application. If you don't place it there, you will not be able to move it freely. So I'll advise you to place it here for you to be able to freely move it in your application without any restrictions. So I think I will need another label. I'll tell you what I'm gonna use that label for, but now let me just add it there. Okay, so now we've added all the controls that we need into our application. It's up to us to assign names to them to be able to distinguish between them. So these are my beautiful controls that I've added. Each one of them will help me to be able to build my login form successfully. So I'll start by assigning the name. So first of all, this one will help us to know that this is the username, and this one also help us to know that the user has to enter a password into our program. And this one will also help the user to enter his or her full name. But I don't think we need that for now, so let me just clear that one off for now, since we are doing a simple login form. Let me clear that one off for now, and let me maintain these two. Okay, so I've added them successfully. So what this button will also do for us is to help us to submit it. When the user click on it, it will be able to be submitted into our web form. So I'll change the control from button to submit. For all you know, if you want to change a control's text property, you click on the control, then you come to the solution explorer, then you find properties, then as properties you scroll to test. So the test will be able to give you the functionality to be able to change the display or the output function of your control. I hope you get it. So I've set the output control for that, and since this is a button, I have to assign an ID to it. The ID will help us when we are coding, to help us to be able to identify the ID, the button from other buttons. So in our naming conventions, we've learned that to be able to distinguish button from a text box, buttons are being assigned with a convention or a prefix of BTN, for short, BTN for button. So you bring your BTN, then you add the name of that particular button that you gave it, and here is the case that I gave it submit, so I'll type submit, BTN submit. So this means that whenever I'm writing a code and I want to refer to this particular button, I just have to type in BTN button, and this particular button will pop up without any stress. So I'm done with this particular button. I'll click on an empty space for the changes to be implemented. I'll come back to this label. This label will also help me to display whether the login has been successful or not. Perhaps I could have used a response, a message box for that, but I'll prefer using the label. So this label, for all you know, I don't have to print anything on the screen whenever the user has logged into the form. So I have to clear all the output text from it, and it has been cleared successfully. So then I have to come, since I'm going to use this particular label in my code, I have to change the ID to be able to know the functionality of that particular label. So this label too, in our naming conventions and in our best programming practices, we know that labels also are being prefaced with LBL. Then you add the functionality of that particular label, that's the identifier for the label. So this particular label will help me to know the status of whether the login has been successful or not. So I'll give it LBL status, and you see it has been changed for me successfully. So we are done with our designing phase. So let's run our program to see if everything works for us. So for running this program for the first time, it usually takes a longer time for it to load, since it's now registering our program in the memory. So we'll wait shortly for it to load for us. Within split second, I think it's taking much more than a split second. So within some couple of minutes, our program will run using our default browser, and here I'm using Chrome. So it's loading for me, and you have to wait patiently for it to load for us. And you can have a sip of a coffee or a tea or something to boost your appetite. Programming is much more exercising patience, so you have to exercise some patience for your code to execute. Okay, so within some couple of minutes, it has been built successfully and everything is working fine. This is our username, and this is our password field, and this is our submit button. And you see the label is not showing because we set it to hidden, and you see the title of our application is also showing. So it means that we've done a good job and our program is working successfully. So I'll just have to do some lot of, but before you can edit it back, you have to turn off the debugging mode for you to be able to have access to the program. So I'll have to shift this table back a little bit. Then I will resize my text box a little bit. There you go. Then I'll shift my button to the left. There you go. And I also expand this one for her. There you go. Okay, so we are done with the design phase, so it's now left with us to do the coding aspect. So first of all, we need to create a database to be able to interact with our code. So first of all, the relational database system that I'm going to use is SQL Server Management Studio, and I'll load it. It's loading, so we have to exercise some patience for it to load for us. This is the SQL Server 2012 Management Studio. It's a database studio that helps us to create databases. It will help you to create, read, update, and delete databases. For all you know, somebody can also use MySQL, but for our best programming practices, or for our preference, we are using Microsoft SQL Server Studio for that. So this is the interface of Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So to be able to create a database, you have to right click on database, then you click on new database, then you give it the name that you want to save for the database. And here I want the name to be Edu. Since you are building a simple educational software, I want it to be Edu. Then I'll click on OK. Within split second, our database will be created for us. So I think it has been created for us. So I have to expand to see the databases in my program, and I have my Edu there. So I've created my database successfully. So I have to create a new table. So I have to expand the Edu, then come to the table field, then I have to right click on tables, then click on create new table. And since we are building a login table for our program, we will need a username, a password. So I have to enter them here. So first of all, I have to enter username, then I have to specify the data type. Since it's a username, I think Baka will go. Baka will do. Baka means it accepts strings, numbers, it accepts any form of characters. That's Baka. And I am limiting it to 50 because I just don't want the users to be entering a lot of data. It's a username and nobody's name for my knowing exceeds 50 characters. So I think 50 is good. Then I'll go to the next field. But first of all, we left something. I have to set an ID. For best programming practices, I have to set an ID. ID will help us to distinguish users from the other. There's a primary key, so it's B number. So our data type will be int. So that one will be int. And since it's a primary key and I want it to be automatically be increasing for me, I have to set another property, and that property will help my database to automatically increase whenever a user enters his or her details. So all I have got to do is to come to identity specification, then I'll switch it to yes. And this will help my program to automatically increase whenever a user enters his or her details. So to be able to get access to that particular functionality, you have to make sure it is a primary key. So I have to set it as a primary key, then I'll come back and expand it, then it's identity, then I'll switch it to yes. Its identity is yes. Then you see the increments is 1. So from 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order. I can also change the seed, but I prefer 1 as the seed. The seed means how it should be increased. So maybe a multiples of 2. I will change it from 1 to 2, and it will be increased by 2. But I prefer the 1. So I'm done with that functionality. So first of all, I've got to continue with the username, and back 50 for that. Then the password also the same, back 50 for now. Then I have to save. To be able to save, you can press Ctrl+X, then it will ask you to give the name, and here I'm gonna give it login since we are creating the login form. So first of all, I'm done creating my database and we are good to go. So back to my Visual Studio. This is what you have to do. Click on Tools, click on Server Explorer, then click on connect to database. Wait for a while for it to load, and here by default it has given me Microsoft SQL Server client. But if yours is the first time you're doing it, it will give you something like this. So when it gives you something like this, since I told you earlier on that we are using Microsoft SQL Server, you have to select this particular one, Microsoft SQL Server. Then you click on OK. Then it will ask you of the server name. The server name, you come back to your database. Then you click on connect. Then you select database engine. Then you copy this particular name. That's the server name. And the authentication, since you are using Windows authentication, there's no need for me to specify the login and the password. That's why I don't want to find any difficulties in connecting to database, so I'm using the Windows authentication. But for best programming practices, it's advisable to use a login and a password for sure. But for now, let's use the Windows authentication for now. So back to our Visual Studio, I'll paste in the server name, and it will give me all the, and you have to make sure that you've selected Windows authentication, and it will give me all the database in my particular database. And here, for instance, you are using Edu as the database name. Then I have to click on test connection. Then I'll click on OK. Then it gives me that the connection has been tested successfully. So for now, we are good to go. We can easily interact with our database without any stress. So for instance, you click on the Quamectech, that's the name of my computer. Then I'll click on the table, and I'll find my login table that I created with my fields all there. I have my ID and my password and the username. So it means it has been successful. But first of all, we have to do some settings to be able to interact with our database. So first of all, click on the database, then you come to the properties field, then you copy this particular connection string. You press Ctrl+A to copy all, to highlight all the connection string. Then you press Ctrl+C, or you right click, then you select copy to be able to copy your connection string. So I've copied it successfully and everything is intact. So I have to have access to my C# backend. So to have access to that, I right click on any empty space on my form, then I'll click on view code. This will give me access to my C# backend end. So this is my C# backend where I'll be coding my database connection. So it's been done successfully for me. So to be able to interact with your database, you need two classes. You have to import two classes, and one of the classes is system.data, and the other is system.data.sql client. These two files, or these two classes, will help us to interact with our database, that's the Microsoft SQL Server. So to import something into your C# language, you have to use the keyword using. Then you bring the name of the class. For all you know, C# is very case sensitive, so be mindful of how you type in C#. So as I told you earlier on, you are importing system.data and you have to terminate it. Then using system.data.sql client, then you terminate. So these two classes will help us to interact with our database. So after doing that, all I have got to do is to paste my connection string. So just after this zero reference, I'll put my cursor there and press enter. Then I have to create a variable to store my connection string. And to create a variable, first of all, you have to bring the data type, then you bring the identifier. The identifier simply means that what you, the programmer, will use to be able to identify the variable that you are creating from other variables. So let me bring my data type as the string. Then the identifier that I'm going to use is CS for short, that's connection string. Then I'll bring my equal to symbol. Then I'll bring at and my double quotes. Then I'll paste the connection string that I copied earlier on there. Then I'll terminate. For all you know, the connection string can be get from here. You click on the Service Explorer, then you click on the database, then you come to the properties aspect, then you copy with Ctrl+A, then you paste it inside. So I've successfully created my connection string successfully. So back to my ASP.NET form. So I have to I want the user, whenever the user clicks on the button, I want something to happen. What do I want to happen? I want it to check to see if the records are inside the database and give authentication. For all you know, I have to program it. So to be able to do that, I have to create a click event. To be able to create a click event in C# or in ASP.NET, I have to double click on that particular control that I want to create the double click event on it. So GS, for instance, I'm creating a double click event on this particular button. So I'll double click on it and it will create a button click event for me. So this is the button click event that my C# program has created for me. So I have to write some letter code here to be able to communicate with my database. So for your concern, I have to use the keyword using, then I have to create a connection. So I'll type connection, SQL connection, then I'll create instance of the connection using SQL connection, then I'll give it a name. Con is equal to new SQL connection. Then I'll pass in an argument. The argument will be the connection string, which we created earlier on with the identifier CS. Then after creating that particular instance of the SQL connection, I'll bring my braces. Then within that, I have to open the connection. So con.open, then I have to terminate it. Then to be able to fetch the data from my database, I need what we call SQL adapter. So adapter, what SQL adapter does is that it connects our Visual Studio to the relational database management system, that's the SQL server. So I have to create an instance of SQL adapter to be able to do that particular thing. So without much ado, I'll type SQL adapter, SQL data adapter, then I'll create instance with the shortcut SDA, then I'll create new, I'll type new SQL data adapter. Then I'll type in the query, which will help me to fetch particular data from my table. So to be able to fetch something from this particular database, you have to make sure that you type a query which will help you to select or retrieve data from this particular database. So to be able to select something from a database, you have to use the keyword select. So I will type select, then I'll bring count, then double braces, then I'll bring my wildcard. This wildcard means you should select everything, select all from this table, and the table name is what? Login. That's what we use in our database. Then I'll specify what do I want to select. I want to select the name of the table, where username equals this particular variable user, and password is also has to be equal to pass. So these should correspond with the name that you use in the database. You see, I use username, so it has to be the same as such. And this is an identifier. This is a variable that I'm creating to store the username, and this one also is another name from the database, which will have to correspond with this one, and it's the same thing as password. And this one, I'm now creating the variable as the identifier for this particular query. So afterwards, you have to bring a comma, because this particular SQL adapter accepts two arguments, that is the query and the particular connection that you are referring to. So I also bring my con, which I created the instance just right here. Okay, so all I have to do is to terminate this particular line of code, and I'm good to go. For all you know, I'll add the code in the description field for your consumption. So after creating the instance of the SQL adapter, all I have told you is that the SQL adapter helps us to retrieve data from our relational database management system, that's the database, and we have to add some small lines of code here. You have to select the data from the database. So the instance that I created, SD select command dot parameters add with value, then I'll bring the variable name which I use user, and here too is accepted to argument. The first one will be the name of the variable, and the second one will be the name of the text box. So here, the name that I used for this particular text box user was tst. Oh, sorry, I didn't change that one, so I have to change it right away. So for this text box, since it's a username, I've got to change it from text box 1 to tst. The prefix, that's the naming convention for text box, that's the prefix one is tst. Then I have to change it to what? Username. I have to do the same for the password. So the same thing, tst password. There you go. That's been changed successfully. So back to my C# language. I type the prefix, then I'll add dot test. Add dot test to it. It means that you should select the values that will be entered in that particular text box. That's the text box tst password. Sorry, it should be username since we are dealing with the user. So tst username the test. Okay, so we are done with this particular one. It's the same thing that we're going to repeat for the other one. So the same thing, sd is select command dot parameters add with value, then the variable that we used for the password was what? Pass. We use pass for the password. So I'll bring my asterisk add symbol, then I'll bring pass, then I'll add a comma to add the second argument, that's tst password dot test, then I'll terminate it as well. So I'm done with the select command. So all I've got to do is to create a data table. What the data table is going to do for us, let me create it and let me explain as time goes on. So I'll need a data table to be able to store the data from the database temporarily for me, and I'll execute them line by line. So I'm creating a data table to help me store the data that's being fetched by the data adapter from the database for me. So after creating the data table, I have to fill it, I have to populate the data table. So filling the data label with values. This is a comment. So I've created an instance of the data adapter. So there's a method within the data adapter called fill. So I'll call that particular method and pass in an argument of dt, that's the data table, so that it will fill the values that's being fetched from the database into this particular data table that's created. And I have to create a condition to check to see if the particular data that we want is within the database that we've created. So I have got to use a control structure, that's an if control structure, to be able to test to see if the database have the values that we have in the database. Usually has the value that the user enters in our database. So to do that, I'll have to call the data table and check the rows. So dt.rows 0 0, it refers to the indexing of the table. Then I have to convert it to string. I have to call that particular method to convert it into string for me. So I've got to check to see if there are values in the database. So if there are values in the database, it means it should be 1. It should be 1. And if there are no values in it, the command will not run as true, or it will iterate to false. So if there's value in that particular database, then I'll print or I'll assign a value to the label that we've created, that the login has been successful. The login is successful. And if there are no, the data that the user enters is not part of my database, or is not in my database, it means that the user don't have to have access to my website. So I'll tell the user that invalid user name and password, and our program will terminate. Okay, so as I told you earlier on, the sda.fill populate the database, populate the data table with the values that it has fetched from the database. And this particular line of code check to see if there are values, the value that the user enters. It checks to see if the value that the user entered is inside my database, and if the value is inside my database, then it has to grant the person access to my website. And if the person's values are not inside my database, then it will print to the screen with the label that invalid username and password. So let's run our program to see if everything is working fine. Okay, so it has loaded successfully for me. So first of all, I've not inserted any value in my database, so I have to insert some values in my database. So let me populate it with some values. So to be able to populate your database with values, you have to right click on your database, then you click on edit top rows, then the ID field, since we set it to auto increment, you have to skip that part, then enter the username. I'm giving it make, and the password too, I'll give it 1234 1234. Then I'll save it, then close. But I think let's try it, because since we ran the program before populating the database, I don't think it will work. But let's try to see if it will work. Wow, it worked. It worked. It worked. It means our database is working, and the value that we entered is really inside our database. See, the username was MICK is there, and the password was also 1234, and it means everything is working fine. Let me try. Let me add make 2 and see. There you go. Invalid username and password. Thank you for watching this particular tutorial. Stay blessed and stay tuned, and subscribe to our channel for more tutorials on ASP.NET.